everyone, and welcome to NAU Theater's Story Hour. My name is Miss Kathleen, and I am your host, but I will be joined by Mr. Nathaniel, who will be reading White Fang, and Miss Kate, who will be finishing up Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, and Miss Charlie, who will continue with The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. And then I will read chapters 6 and 7 of The Story of Dr. Doolittle. So we're going to get started in just a moment, but I want to remind you that the books that we're reading today are in public domain and you can get copies of them online. Also, I want to remind you that the books are for ages of about 9 to maybe 14, but we welcome readers of all ages to join us. So without any further ado, let's get into the Merry Adventures of Robin Hood with Miss Charlie.
Hi guys, today we're continuing with the Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. Last time we finished the chapter How Robin Hood Came to Be an Outlaw, and today we start the chapter Robin Hood and the Tinker. Now just a quick little catch up. Last time Robin Hood gained his right-hand man Little John by actually losing a duel with him but winning a shooting match with him. Now it was told before how 200 pounds were set upon Robin's head, and how the Sheriff of Nottingham swore that he himself would seize Robin. Now the Sheriff did not yet know what a force Robin had about him in Sherwood, but thought that he might serve a warrant for his arrest as he could upon any other man that had broken the laws. Therefore he offered 80 golden angels to anyone who would serve this warrant. But men of Nottingham town knew more of Robin Hood and of his doings than the Sheriff did, and many laughed to think of serving a warrant upon the bold outlaw, knowing well that all they would get for such service would be cracked crowns. So no one came forward to take the matter in hand. Thus a fortnight passed, in which time none came forward to do the Sheriff's business. Then he said, "A right good reward I have offered to whosoever would serve my warrant upon Robin Hood, and I marvel that no one has come to undertake the task." Then one of his men who was near him said, "Good master, thou wottest not the force of Robin Hood has about him, and how little he cares for the warrant of king or sheriff. Truly no one goes to take on the service for fear of cracked crowns and broken bones." "Then I hold all Nottingham men to be cowards," said the sheriff. "And let me see the man in all Nottinghamshire that dare disobey the warrant of our sovereign lord King Harry, for by the shrine of St. Edmund I will hang him high. But if no man in Nottingham dare win 80 angels, I will send elsewhere, for there should be men of mettle somewhere in this land." Then he called upon a messenger in whom he placed great trust, and bade him to saddle his horse and make ready to go to Lincoln town to see whether he could find anyone there that would do his bidding and win the reward. So that same morning the messenger started forth upon his errand. Bright shone the sun upon the dusty highway that led from Nottingham to Lincoln, stretching away all white over hill and dale. Dusty was the highway, and dusty was the throat of the messenger, so that his heart was glad when he saw before him the sign of the Blue Boar Inn. The inn looked fair to his eyes, and the shade of the oak trees stood around it seemed cool and pleasant. So he alighted himself from his horse to rest for a time, calling for a pot of ale to refresh his thirsty throat. He there saw a party of right jovial fellows seated beneath the spreading oak tree in front of the door. There was a tinker, 2 barefoot friars, and a party of 6 of the king's foresters, all clad in Lincoln green. And all of them were quaffing humming ale and singing merry ballads of the good old times. Loud laughed the foresters as jests were bandied about the singing, and louder laughed the friars, for they were lusty men with beards that curled like the wool of rams. But loudest of all laughed the tinker, and he sang more sweetly than any of the rest. His bag and his hammer hung upon a twig of the oak tree, and near by leaned his good stout cudgel, as thick as his wrist and knotted at the end. "Come," cried one of the foresters to the tired messenger. "Come join us for this shot. Ho, landlord, bring a fresh pot of ale for each man." The messenger was glad enough to sit down with the others who were there, for his limbs were weary, and the ale was good. "What news thou bearest thou so fast?" quoth one, "and whither ridest thou today?" The messenger was a chatty soul, and loved a bit of gossip dearly. He told all, and then he told how none could be found in all Nottingham town to serve the warrant, for fear of cracked pates and broken bones, and how that he, the messenger, was now upon his way to Lincoln town to find of what mettle the Lincoln men might be. "Now come I, forsooth, from good Banbury town," said the jolly tinker, "and no one nigh Nottingham nor Sherwood either, and that be the mark, can cudgel with my grip. Why, lads, did I not meet the mad wag of Simon Ely, even at the famous fair Hertford town, and beat him in the ring in the place before Sir Robert Leslie and his lady? That same Robin Hood, of whom I wot I never heard before, is a right merry blade. But gin he be strong, am I not stronger? And gin he be sly, am I not slyer? Now by my own mother's son, I will meet the same sturdy rogue, and gin he mind not the seal of our glorious sovereign King Harry, and the warrant of good Sheriff of Nottinghamshire, I will so bruise, beat, and bemaul his pate until he shall never move a finger or toe again. Hear ye that, bully boys?" "Now art thou the man of my farthing," cried the messenger, "and back thou goest with me to Nottingham town." "Nay," quoth the tinker, with his head shaking his head slowly from side to side, "go I with no man, gin it not be of my own free will." "Nay, nay," said the messenger, "no man is there in Nottinghamshire that can make thee go against thy will, thou brave fellow." "Ay, that I be brave," said the tinker. "Ay, marry," said the messenger, "thou art a brave lad, but our good sheriff hath offered 80 angels of bright gold to whosoever should serve the warrant upon Robin Hood, though little good it will do." "Then I will go with thee, lad. Do but wait till I get my bag and hammer and my cudgel. Ay, let me but meet this same Robin Hood, and let me see whether he will not mind the king's warrant." So after having paid their score, the messenger, with the tinker striding beside his nag, started back to Nottingham again. One bright morning soon after this time, Robin Hood started off to Nottingham town to find out what he was doing there, walking merrily along the roadside, where the grass was sweet with daisies, his eyes wandering and his thoughts also. His bugle horn hung at his hip, and his bow and arrows at his back, while in his hand he bore a good stout oaken staff, which he twirled with his fingers as he strolled along. And thus he walked down a shady lane, and he saw a tinker coming, trolling a merry song as he drew nigh. On his back hung his bag and his hammer, and in his hand he carried a right stout crabstaff full 6 feet long, and thus he sang, until he was interrupted by Robin. "Halloa, good friend!" cried Robin. "And who art thou dost so boldly check a fair song?" quoth the tinker, stopping his singing. "Halloa thine own self, whether thou be good friend or no. But let me tell thee, stout fellow, gin thou be a good friend, it were well for us both, but gin thou be no good friend, it were ill for thee." "And whence comest thou, my lusty blade?" quoth Robin. "I come from Banbury," said the tinker. "Alas!" quoth Robin, "I hear there is sad news this merry morn." "Ha! Is it indeed so?" cried the tinker eagerly. "Prithee tell it speedily, for I am a tinker by trade, and as thou seest, I am in my trade, I am greedy for news, even as a priest is greedy for farthings." "Well then," quoth Robin, "list thou and I will tell, but bear thyself up bravely, for the news is sad, I wot. Thus it is, I hear the 2 tinkers are in the stocks for drinking ale and beer." "Now a murrain seize thee and thy news, thou scurvy dog," quoth the tinker, "for thou speakest but ill of good men. Bad news it is indeed, gin there be 2 stout fellows in the stocks." "Nay," said Robin, "thou hast missed the mark, and dost but weep for the wrong sow. The sadness in the news lieth that there be but 2 in the stocks, and for the others do roam the county at large." "Now by the pewter platter of St. Dunstan," cried the tinker, I have a good part of mind to baste thy hide for thine ill jest. But gin men be put in the stocks for drinking ale and beer, I trow thou would not lose thy part. Loud laughed Robin, and cried, Now well taken, Tinker, well taken. Why, thy wits are like beer, and thy do froth up most when thy grow sour. But right art thou, man, for I love ale and beer right as well. Therefore come straight away with me, hard by to the sign of the Blue Boar, and if thou drinkest as thou appearest, and if I wot thou wilt not belie thy looks, I will drench thy throat with as good as home brewed as ever was tapped in all of Nottinghamshire. Now by my faith, said the tinker, thou art a right good fellow in spite of thy scurvy jests. I love thee, my sweet chuck, and gin I not go with thee to that same Blue Boar, thou mayest call me a heathen. Tell me thy good news, good friend, I prithee, quoth Robin, as they trudged along together. For tinkers, I ween, are all as full of news as an egg of meat. Now I love thee as my brother, my bully blade, said the tinker, else I would not give thee my news. For sly I am, man, and I would in hand a grave undertaking that doth call for all my wits, for I come to seek a bold outlaw that men hereabouts called Robin Hood. Within my pouch I have a warrant, all fairly written out on parchment, forsooth, with a great red seal for to make it lawful. Could I but meet this same Robin Hood, I would serve it upon his dainty body, and if he minded it not, I would beat him until every one of his ribs would cry Amen. But thou livest hereabouts. Mayhaps thou knowest Robin Hood thyself, good fellow. Ay, marry, that I do somewhat, quoth Robin, and I have seen him this very morn. But, tinker, men say that he is but a sad, sly thief. Thou hadst better watch thy warrant, man, or else he may steal it out thy very pouch. Let him but try, cried the tinker. Sly he may be, but sly I am too. I would I had him here now, man to man. And he made his heavy cudgel to spin again. But what manner of man is he, lad? Much like myself, said Robin, laughing, and in height and in build and age nigh the same. He hath blue eyes too. Nay, quoth the tinker, thou art but a green youth. I thought him to be a great bearded man. Nottingham men feared him so. Truly he is not so old nor stout as thou art, said Robin, but men do call him a right deft hand at quarter-staff. That may be, said the tinker sturdily, but I am more deft than he, for I could overcome Simon of Ely in a fair bout in the ring at Hertford town. But if thou knowest him, my jolly blade, wilt thou go with me and bring me to him? 80 bright angles hath the sheriff promised me, if I serve warrant upon the knave's body, and 10 of them I will give to thee if thou showest me him. Ay, that I will, quoth Robin, but show me thy warrant, man, until I see whether it be good or no. That I will not do, even to mine own brother, answered the tinker. No man shall see my warrant until I serve it upon yon fellow's own body. So be it, quoth Robin, and thou shalt show it not to me. I know not to whom thou wilt show it. But here we are at the sign of the Blue Boar, so let us in and taste the brown October. No sweeter inn could be found in all of Nottinghamshire than the Blue Boar. Well known was the inn to Robin Hood and his band, for there they had and such merry companions as Little John or Will Stuteley or young David of Doncaster often gathered when all the forest was filled with snow. As for mine host, he knew how to keep a still tongue in his head and to swallow his words before they passed his teeth, for he knew very well which side of his bread was spread with butter. For Robin and his band were the best of customers and paid their scores without having them chalked up behind the door. So now, when Robin Hood and the tinker came hereto and called aloud for 2 great pots of ale, none would have known from the look or speech that the host had set eyes upon the outlaw before. Bide thou here, quoth Robin to the tinker, while I go and see what mine host draweth ale from the right butt, for he hath good October, I know, and that brewed by Withold of Tamworth's. So saying, he went he went within and whispered to the host to add a measure of Flemish strong waters to the good English ale, which the latter did and brought it to them. "By Our Lady," said the tinker, after a long draught of ale, "you same with old of Tamworth, a right good Saxon name too, I would have thee know, bereft the most humming ale that ever passed the lips of Wat of the Crabstaff." "Drink, man, drink!" cried Robin, only wetting his own lips meanwhile. "Ho, landlord, bring my friend another pot of the same, and now I will have a song, my jolly blade." "Ay, that I will give thee a song, my lovely fellow," quoth the tinker, "for I never tasted such ale in all my days before. By Our Lady, it doth make my head hum even now. Hey, dame hostess, come listen, and thou wouldst hear a song, and thou too, thou bonny lass, for never I sing so well as when the bright eyes do look upon me for a while." Then he sang an ancient ballad of the time of good King Arthur, called The Marriage of Saint Sir Gawain, which you might have some read yourself in the stout English of early times. And he sang, and all listened to the tale of a noble knight and his sacrifice to the king. But before the tinker came to the last verse, his tongue had began to trip, and his head to spin, because of the strong waters mixed with the ale. First his tongue tripped, and then it grew thick of sound, and then his head waged from side to side, until at last he fell asleep as though he never would have been wakened again. Then Robin Hood laughed aloud, and quickly took the warrant from out the tinker's pouch, with his deft fingers. Sly art thou, tinker," quoth he, "but not yet, I bow, art thou as sly as the same sly thief Robin Hood." Then he called the host to him and said, "Here, good man, are 10 broad shillings for the entertainment thou hast given us today. See that thou takest good care of thy fair guest here, and when he wakes, thou mayest again charge him 10 shillings also, and if he hath not, thou mayest take his bag and hammer, and even his coat in payment. Thus I do punish those who come into the greenwood to dole me. As for thine own self, I never knew a landlord yet that would not charge twice as he could." At this the host smiled shyly, as though saying to himself the rustic saw, "Teach a magpie to suck eggs." The tinker slept until the afternoon drew to a close, and the shadows grew long beside the woodland edge, and he awoke. First he looked up, and then he looked down, and then he looked east, and then he looked west, for he was gathering his wits together like barley straw blown about by the wind. First he thought of his merry companion, but he was gone. Then he thought of his stout crabstaff that he had within his hand, then of his warrant, then of his fourscore angels that he was to be given for serving it upon Robin Hood. He thrust his hand into his pouch, but not a scrap nor a farthing was there. Then he sprang to his feet in a rage. "Ho, landlord!" cried he, "whither hath thou knave gone that was with me but now?" "What knave thee meaneth, your worship?" quoth the landlord, calling the tinker worship to soothe him, as a man would pour oil upon angry water. "I know no knave with your worship, for I swear no man would dare call that man knave so nigh to Sherwood Forest. A right stout yeoman I saw with your worship, but I thought that your worship knew him, for few there be about here that pass him by and know him not. Now how should I, that never have squealed in your sty, know that all the swine therein? Who was he then? And 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 thou knowest him so well? Well, yon same is a right stout fellow whom men here do call Robin Hood, which same—" "Now, by your lady!" cried the tinker hastily, and in a deep voice like an angry bull, "thou didst see me come into thine inn, I, a staunch honest craftsman, and never told me who my company was, well knowing thine own self he was. Now I have a right round piece of mind to crack thy knave's pate for thee." And he took up his cudgel and looked at the landlord as though he would smite him where he stood. "Nay," cried the host, throwing up his elbow, for he feared the blow, "how new that I knowest him not?" "Well and truly thankful mayest thou be," quoth the tinker, "that I am a patient man, and do so spare thy bald crown, else thou wouldst never cheat a customer again. But as for this same knave Robin Hood, I go straightway to seek him, and if I do not score him knave's paste, cut my staff into faggots, and call me a woman." So saying, he gathered himself to depart. Nay, quoth the landlord, standing in front of him, and holding out his arms like a gooseherd driving his flock, for money made him bold. Thou goest not until thou hast paid my score. But he did not pay thee? Not so much as 1 farthing, and 10 good shillings worth of ale ye drunk today. Nay, say I, thou goest not away without paying me, else shall our good sheriff know of it. But not have I to pay thee with, good fellow, quoth the tinker. Good fellow me not, said the landlord. Good fellow am I not when it cometh to lose 10 shillings. Pay me that thou owest me in broad money, or else leave thy coat and bag and hammer. Yet I wot they are not worth 10 shillings, and I shall lose thereby. Nay, and thou stirrest, I have a great dog within that I will loose upon thee. Make open thy door, and let forth Brian, if this fellow stirs 1 step. Nay, quoth the tinker, for by roaming the country he had learned what dogs were. Take thou what thou wilt have, and let me depart in peace, and may a murrain go with thee. But, O landlord, and I cut your scurvy varlet, I swear he shall pay full with usury for that he hath had. So saying, he strode away towards the forest, talking to himself, while the landlord and his worthy dame Megan stood looking after him, and laughed when he had fairly gone. Robin and I tripped yon ass out of his pack main neatly, quoth the landlord. Now it happened about this time that Robin Hood was going through the forest to Fosse Way, to see what was to be seen there, for the moon was full, and the night gave promise of being bright. In his hand he carried stout oaken staff, and at his side hung a bugle horn, and thus he walked up a path, whistling down another path came the tinker, muttering to himself and shaking his head like an angry bull, and so, at a sudden bend, they met sharply face to face. Each stood still for a time, then Robin spoke. "Halloa, my sweet bird," said he, laughing merrily. "How likest thou thine ale? Wilt thou not sing me another song?" The tinker said nothing at first, but stood looking at Robin with a grim face. "Now," quoth he at last, "I am right glad I have met thee, and if I do not rattle thy bones within thy hide this day, I give thee leave to put my foot upon my neck." "With all my heart," cried merry Robin. "Rattle my bones an thou canst." So saying, he gripped his staff and threw himself upon the guard. The tinker spat upon his hands, and, grasping his staff, came straight at the other. He struck 2 or 3 blows, but soon found that he had met his match, for Robin warded and parried all of them, and before the tinker thought, he gave him a rap upon the ribs in return. At this Robin laughed aloud, and the tinker grew more angry than ever, and smote again with all his might and main. Again Robin warded 2 of the strokes, but at the third his staff broke beneath the mighty blows of the tinker. "Now ill betide thee, traitor staff," cried Robin, as it fell from his hands. "A foul stick art thou to serve me in thus mine hour of need." "Now yield to thee," quoth the tinker, "for thou art my captive, and if thou do not, I will beat thy pate into a pudding." To this Robin Hood made no answer, but clapping his horn to his lips, he blew 3 blasts, loud and clear. "Ay," quoth the tinker, "blow thou mayest, but go thou must with me to Nottingham town, for the sheriff would fain see thee there. Now wilt thou yield thee, or shall I have to break thy pretty head?" "And I must drink sour ale, I must," quoth Robin, "but never have I yielded me to a man before, and without wound or mark upon my body. Nor, when I bethink me, will I yield now. Ho, merry men, come quickly!" And then came from the forest, leaped Little John, and 6 stout yeomen clad in Lincoln green. "How now, good master," cried Little John, "what need hast thou that thou dost wind the horn so loudly?" "There stands a tinker," quoth Robin, "that would fain take me to Nottingham, there to hang upon the gallows tree." "Then he shall himself hang forthwith," cried Little John, and he and the others made at the tinker so to seize him. "Nay, touch him not," said Robin, "for a right stout man is he. A metal man he is by trade, and a metal man by nature. Moreover, he doth sing a lovely ballad. Say, good fellow, wilt thou join my merry men? 3 suits of Lincoln green shalt thou have a year, besides 40 marks in fee. Thou shalt share with us all good, and lead a right merry life in the greenwood. For cares we have not, and much misfortune cometh upon us within the sweet shades of Sherwood, where we shoot dun deer, and feed upon venison, and sweet oaten cakes, and curds and honey. Wilt thou come with me? Ay, marry, I will join with you all, quoth the tinker, for I love a merry life, and I love thee, good master, though thou didst thwack my ribs and cheat me into the bargain. Fain I am to my own thou art both a stouter and a slyer man than I, so I will obey thee and be thine own true servant. So all turned their steps to the forest depths, where the tinker was to live henceforth.
Thank you, Miss Charlie. That was great. I can't wait to keep reading that book. Next up, we're going to have the story of Dr. Doolittle, which I'm going to read, and I want to catch you up just a little bit. So if you remember, last we saw the doctor, they were shipwrecked on the coast of Africa. And Polynesia and Chi-Chi and Grub-Gub, the pig and the dog, Jib, they all gathered around and got all their things and made sure everybody was okay. Oh, the crocodile too. And in that process, they couldn't find the doctor's hat. They found the hat, and what was in the hat but a white mouse from England, from Puddleby. So they all were making sure everybody was okay, and out of the forest came a man who told them that they could not be in the land of Jolinki without meeting the king. So they all gathered up their stuff and trekked through the forest. The 6th chapter, Polynesia and the King. When they had gone a little way through the thick forest, they came to a wide, clear space, and they saw the king's palace. This was where the king lived with his queen Ermentrude and their son, the prince. The prince was away fishing for salmon in the river, but the king and the queen were sitting under an umbrella before the palace door, and Queen Ermentrude was asleep. When the doctor had come up to the palace, the king asked him his business, and the doctor told him why he had come to Africa, which, remember, was because of the sick monkeys. "You may not travel through my lands," said the king. "Many years ago, a man came to these shores when I was very kind to him. But after he dug holes in the ground to get gold and killed all the elephants to get their ivory tusks, he went away secretly in his ship. Never again shall a stranger travel through the land of Jolinki." The king turned to some of his men who were standing near and said, "Take away this medicine man with all his animals and lock him up in the strongest prison." So 6 of the men led the doctor and all of his pets away and shut them into the dungeon. The dungeon had only one little window high up that wall, and that window had bars on it, and the door was strong and thick. Then they all grew very, very sad, and Gub-Gub, the pig, began to cry. But Chi-Chi said he would spank him if he didn't stop that horrible noise. And so he kept quiet. "Are we all here?" asked the doctor, after he had got used to the dim light. "Yes, I think so," said the duck, and started to count them. "Where's Polynesia?" asked the crocodile. "She isn't here." "Are you sure?" asked the doctor. "Look again. Polynesia! Polynesia, where are you?" "I suppose she escaped," grumbled the crocodile. Well, that's just like her. Sneaked off into the jungle as soon as her friends get in trouble. I'm not that kind of bird, said the parrot, climbing out of the pocket of the tail in the tail of the doctor's coat. You see, I'm small enough to get through bars of that window, and I was afraid they would put me in a cage instead. So while the king was busy talking, I hid in the doctor's pocket in the tail of his coat, and that's where I am. That's what you call a ruse, she said, smoothing her feathers with her beak. Good gracious, said the doctor. You're lucky I didn't sit on you. Now listen, said Polynesia. Tonight, as soon as it gets dark, I'm going to creep through the bars of the window and fly over to the palace. And then you'll see. I'll soon find a way to make the king let us all out of prison. Oh, what can you do? Can you do? Said Grub Grub, turning up his nose and beginning to cry again. You're only a bird. Quite true, said the parrot, but do not forget that although I'm only a bird, I can talk like a man, and I know Africa. So that night, when the moon was shining through the palm trees and all the king's men were asleep, the parrot slipped out through those bars in the prison and flew across to the palace. The pantry window had been broken by a tennis ball the week before, and so Polynesia popped through that hole. She heard the prince snoring in his bedroom at the back of the palace. She then tiptoed up the stairs till she came to the king's bedroom. She opened the door gently and peeped in. The queen was away at a dance that night at her cousin's, but the king was in bed, fast asleep. Polynesia crept in very, very softly and got under the bed. She then coughed, just the way Dr. Doolittle used to cough. But the king was still fast asleep. The king opened his eyes a moment later. So Polynesia coughed again. Polynesia could mimic anybody. The king opened his eyes and said sleepily, Is that you, Ermentrude? He thought it was the queen who came back from the dance. Then Polynesia coughed again, very loud, like a man. And the king sat up, wide awake, and said, Who's that? I'm Dr. Doolittle, said the parrot, just the way the doctor would have said it. What are you doing in my bedroom? Cried the king. How dare you get out of prison? Where are you? I don't see you. But the parrot just laughed a long, deep, and jolly laugh. Just like the doctor's. Stop laughing and come here at once so I can see you, said the king. Foolish king, answered Polynesia, as if she was Dr. Doolittle. Have you forgotten that you are talking to John Doolittle, MD, the most wonderful man on earth? Of course, you cannot see me. I've made myself invisible. There is nothing I cannot do. Now listen, I have come here tonight to warn you. If you don't let me and my animals travel through your kingdom, I will make you all sick and all your people sick, just like the monkeys. For I can make people well, but I can also make them sick with my little finger. Send your soldiers at once to open the dungeon door, or I shall give you all mumps before the morning sun has risen on the hills of Jolinki. Then the king began to tremble and was very, very much afraid. He trembled hard and thought at the same time, and then said, "Doctor, it shall be as you say. Do not raise your little pinky, please." And he jumped out of the bed and ran to tell the soldiers to open the prison door. As soon as he was gone, Polynesia crept down the stairs and left through the pantry window. But the queen, who was just letting herself in at the back door with a latchkey, saw that the parrot was getting out through the broken glass. And when the king came back to bed, she told him what she had seen. Then the king understood that he had been tricked, and he was dreadfully angry. He hurried back to the prison at once. But it was too late. The door stood open, that dungeon was empty, the doctor and all of his animals were gone. The 7th chapter. The Bridge of Apes. Queen Ermintrude had never in her life seen her husband so terribly angry as he got that night. He gnashed his teeth with rage. He called everybody a fool. He threw his toothbrush at the palace cat. He rushed around in his nightshirt and woke up all of his army and sent them into the jungle to catch the doctor. Then he made all of his servants go too, his cooks, his gardeners, his barber, the prince, the prince's tutor, and even the queen. She was so tired from dancing, and she was wearing a pair of very tight shoes. But she too was packed off to help the soldiers in their search. All this time, the doctor and his animals were running through the forest towards the land of the monkeys as fast as they could go. Gub Gub, with his short little legs, soon got tired, and the doctor had to carry him, which made it pretty hard when they had the trunk and the handbag with them as well. The king of Jolinki thought it would be easy for his army to find him because the doctor was in a strange land and he did not know. He didn't know how to go. But he was wrong because the monkey Chi-Chi knew all the paths through the jungle better than the king's soldiers did. And he led the doctor and his pets to the very thickest part of the forest, a place where no man had ever been before. And he hid them in a big hollow tree between high rocks. "We had better wait here," said Chi-Chi, "till the soldiers have gone back to bed. Then we can go into the land of the monkeys." So there they stayed the whole night through. They often heard the king's men searching and talking in the jungle round about, but they were quite safe, for no one knew of that hiding place but Chi-Chi, not even the other monkeys. At last, when daylight began to come through the thick leaves overhead, they heard Queen Ermintrude saying, in a very, very tired voice, that it was no use looking anymore, and they might as well go back and get some sleep. As soon as the soldiers all had gone home, Chi-Chi brought the doctor and his animals out of the hiding place, and they all set off for the land of the monkeys. It was a very long, long way, and they were getting very, very tired, especially Gub Gub with his short little legs. But when he cried, they gave him milk out of coconuts, which he was very fond of. They always had plenty to eat and drink because Chi-Chi in Polynesia knew all the different kinds of fruits and vegetables that grow in the jungle and where to find them, like dates and figs and ground nuts and ginger and yams. They used to make their lemonade out of the juice of wild oranges sweetened with honey, which they got from the bees' nests in the hollow trees. No matter what it was they asked for, Chi-Chi and Polynesia knew how to find it. They even got the doctor some tobacco one day when he had finished what he had brought with him and he wanted a smoke. At night, they slept in tents made of palm leaves on thick, soft, dried grass. And after a while, they got used to walking such a lot that they didn't get so tired and actually enjoyed the life of a traveler very much. But they were always glad when the night came and they stopped for resting. Then the doctor used to make a little fire of sticks, and they all had their supper, and they would sit round in a ring listening to Polynesia singing songs about the sea and Chi-Chi telling stories about the jungle. And many of the tales that Chi-Chi told were very interesting because although monkeys had no history books of their own before Dr. Doolittle came to write for them, they remember everything that happens. And they remember it by telling their stories to their children. And Chi-Chi spoke of many things his grandmother had told him. Tales of long, 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 long ago, before Noah and the flood, of the days when men dressed in bearskins and lived in holes in the rock and ate their mutton raw because they did not know what cooking was, having never have seen a fire. And he told them of the great mammoths, and lizards as long as a train. And they wandered over the mountains in those times, nibbling from treetops. And they often got interested listening that when he finished, they found their fire had gone right out. And they had to scurry around quickly to get more sticks and build a new one. Now, when the king's army had gone back and told that king that they couldn't find the doctor, the king sent them right back out again and told them that they must stay in that jungle till they caught the doctor and all those animals. So this time, while the doctor and animals were going along towards the land of monkeys, thinking themselves quite safe, they were actually still being followed by the king's men. If Chi-Chi had known this, he would have most likely hidden them again, but he didn't know it. One day, Chi-Chi climbed up on that high rock over there, and he looked out over the treetops. And when he came down, he said they were now quite close to the land of monkeys and would soon be there. And that same evening, sure enough, they saw Chi-Chi's cousin and a lot of other monkeys who had not yet gotten sick. And they were sitting in the trees by the edge of a swamp, looking and waiting for them. And when they saw the famous doctor really coming through the forest, these monkeys made a tremendous noise, cheering and waving leaves and singing out in branches to greet them. They wanted to carry his bag and the trunk and everything that they had with them. And one of the bigger ones carried Gub Gub, who had gotten very tired again. Then two of them rushed on in front to tell the sick monkeys that the great doctor had come at last. But The king's men, who were still following, had heard the noise that the monkeys were made cheering, and they at last knew that the doctor was in the forest, and they hastened to catch him. The big monkey carrying Gub Gub was coming along behind slowly, and he saw the captain of the army sneaking through the trees. So he hurried after the doctor to tell him. Then they all ran harder and harder, harder than they've ever run in their lives. And the king's men coming after them began running hard too, and the captain ran the hardest of all. Then the doctor tripped over his medicine bag and fell in the mud, and the captain thought surely he would catch the doctor once and for all. But the captain had very, very long ears, and through his hair, though it was very short, as he sprang forward to take hold of the doctor, his ears got caught fast on a tree, and the rest of the army had to stop and help him. By this time, the doctor had picked himself up and was on the run again, running and running and running, and Chi-Chi shouted, It's all right. We have not far to go yet. Ah, ah, ah. But before they could get to the land of the monkeys, they came to a steep cliff with a river flowing below. And this was the end of the kingdom of Jolinki. And the land of the monkeys was on the other side of that river. And then Jip the dog looked over the edge of that steep cliff and said, Golly, how are we ever going to get across? Oh dear, said Gub Gub. The king's men are quite close now. Look at them. Oh, I'm afraid we're going to be taken to prison again. And he began to weep. But the big monkey who was carrying the pig dropped him on the ground and cried out to the monkeys, Boys, a bridge, quick, make a bridge. We've only a minute to do it. They've got the captain loose and he's coming like a deer. Get lively. A bridge, a bridge. The doctor began to wonder what they were going to make a bridge out of, and he gazed around to see. They had no boards hidden any place, had they? But when he looked back at the cliff, there, hanging across the river, was a bridge all ready for him, made of living monkeys. For a while, his back was turned. While his back was turned, the monkeys, quick as a flash, had made themselves into a bridge just by holding their hands and their feet. And the big one shouted to the doctor, walk over, all of you, hurry. Gub Gub was a bit scared, walking on such a narrow bridge that made him dizzy above that river. But he got over all right, and so did all of them. John Doolittle was the last to cross, and just as he was getting to the other side, the king's men came rushing to the cliff edge. Then they shook their fists and yelled with rage, for they saw that they were too late. The doctor and all of his animals were safe in the land of monkeys, and the bridge was pulled across to the other side. Then Chi-Chi turned to the doctor and said, Many great explorers and gray-bearded naturalists have lain long weeks hidden in the jungle, waiting to see the monkeys do that trick. But we never let a man get a glimpse of it before. You are the first to see the famous Bridge of Apes. And the doctor felt very pleased. Well, that's the end of chapter 7, and that's where we're going to leave off today. So join in again next week so you can hear what happens in the land of monkeys and whether he helps those monkeys to get well. Next up, we will have the final reading of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. So enjoy it, and I'll see you on the other side.
Good afternoon and welcome to the end of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. When we left the story, Morgiana, Ali Baba's servant Morgiana, had discovered that the 37 oil jars that had been brought into Ali Baba's home had thieves in them, had men in them. And she assumed that the guest was the captain of the thieves. And so the last sentence we heard before we ended last time was, and thus she passed from jar to jar, 37 in all, giving the same answer till she came to the one which contained the oil. She had told all the men that it was not yet time. So the situation was now clear to her. Aware of the source from which her master had acquired his wealth, she guessed at once that in extending shelter to the oil merchant, Ali Baba had in fact admitted to his house the robber captain and his band. On the instant, her resolution was formed. Having filled the oil can, she returned to the kitchen. There she lit the lamp, and then, taking a large kettle, went back once more to the jar which contained the oil. Filling the kettle, she carried it back to the kitchen, and putting under it a great fire of wood had soon brought it to the boil. Then taking it in hand once more, she went out into the yard and poured into each jar, in turn, a sufficient quantity of the boiling oil to scald its occupant to death. She then returned to the kitchen, and having made Ali Baba's broth, put out the fire, blew out the lamp, and sat down by the window to watch. Before long, the captain of the robbers awoke from the short sleep which he had allowed himself, and finding that all was silent in the house, he rose softly and opened the window. Below stood the oil jars. Gently into their midst he threw the handful of pebbles agreed on as a signal, but from the oil jars came no answer. He threw a second and a third time. Yet though he could hear the pebbles falling among the jars, there followed only the silence of the dead. Wondering whether his band had fled, leaving him in the lurch, or whether they were all asleep, he grew uneasy, and descending in haste, made his way into the court. As he approached the first jar, a smell of burning and hot oil assailed his nostrils. And looking within, he beheld in rigid contortion the dead body of his comrade. In every jar, the same sight presented itself till he came to the end one which had contained the oil. There, in what was missing, the means and manners of his companion's death was made clear to him. Aghast at the discovery and awake to the danger that now threatened him, he did not delay an instant, but forcing the garden gate and thence climbing from wall to wall, he made his escape out of the city. When Morgiana, who had remained all this time on the watch, was assured of his final departure, she put her master's bath linen ready and went to bed, well satisfied with her day's work. The next morning, Ali Baba, awakened by his slave, went to the baths before daybreak. I'm going back one paragraph because I'm trying to avoid using the word slave. When Morgiana, who had remained all this time on the watch, was assured of his final departure, she put her master's bath linen ready and went to bed, well satisfied with her day's work. The next morning, Ali Baba, awakened by his servant, went to the baths before daybreak. On his return, he was greatly surprised to find that the merchant was gone, leaving his mules and oil jars behind him. He inquired of Morgiana the reason. "You will find the reason," said she, "if you look into the first jar you come to." Ali Baba did so, and seeing a man, startled back with a cry. "Do not be afraid," said Morgiana. "He is dead and harmless, and so are all the others whom you will find if you look further." As Ali Baba went from one jar to another, finding always the same sight of horror within, his knees trembled under him, and when he came at last to the one empty oil jar, he stood for a time motionless, turning upon Morgiana eyes of wonder and inquiry. "And what," he said then, "has become of the merchant?" "To tell you that," said Morgiana, "will be to tell you the whole story. You will be better able to hear it if you have your broth first." But the curiosity of Ali Baba was far too great. He would not be kept waiting. So, without further delay, she gave him the whole history, so far as she knew it, from beginning to end. And by her intelligent putting of one thing against another, she left him at last in no possible doubt as to the source and nature of the conspiracy which her quick wits had happily defeated. "And now, dear master," she said in conclusion, "continue to be on your guard, for though all these are dead, one remains alive, and he, if I mistake not, is the captain of the band, and for that reason the more formidable and the more likely to cherish the hope of vengeance." When Morgiana had done speaking, Ali Baba clearly perceived that he owed to her not merely the protection of his property, but life itself. His heart was full of gratitude. "Do not doubt," he said, "that before I die, I will forward you as you deserve. And as an immediate proof from this moment, I give you your liberty." This token of his approval filled Morgiana's heart with delight, but she had no intention of leaving so kind a master, even had she been sure that all dangers were now over. The immediate question which next presented itself was how to dispose of the bodies. Luckily, at the far end of the garden stood a thick grove of trees, and under these Ali Baba was able to dig a large trench without attracting the notice of his neighbors. Here the remains of the 37 robbers were laid side by side, the trench was filled again, and the ground made level. As for the mules, since Ali Baba had no use for them, he sent them, one or two at a time, to the market to be sold. Meanwhile, the robber captain had fled back to the forest. Entering the cave, he was overcome by its gloom and loneliness. "Alas," he cried, "my comrades, partners in my adventures, sharers of my fortune, how shall I endure to live without you? Why did I lead you to a fate where valor was of no avail, and where death turned you into objects of ridicule? Surely you have died, had you died sword in hand, my sorrow had been less bitter. And now what remains for me but to take vengeance for your death, and to prove, by achieving it without aid, that I was worthy to be the captain of such a band." Thus resolved, at an early hour the next day, he assumed a disguise suitable to his purpose, and going to the town, took largely in a khan. Entering into conversation with his host, he inquired whether anything of interest had happened recently in the town. But the other, though full of gossip, had nothing to tell him concerning the matter in which he was most interested. For Ali Baba, having to conceal from all the source of his wealth, had also to be silent as to the dangers in which it involved him. The captain then inquired whether there was a shop for him, and hearing of one that suited him, he came to terms with the owner, and before long had furnished it with all kinds of rich stuffs and carpets and jewelry, which he brought by degrees with great secrecy from the cave. Now, this shop happened to be opposite to that which had belonged to Qasim, and was now occupied by the son of Ali Baba. So, before long, the son and the newcomer, who had assumed the name of Kojia Hussein, became acquainted, and as the youth had good looks, kind manners, and a sociable disposition, it was not long before the acquaintance became intimate. Kojia Hussein did all he could to seal the pretended friendship, the more so as it had not taken him long to discover how the young man and Ali Baba were related. So, plying him constantly with small presents and acts of hospitality, he forced on him the obligation of making some return. Ali Baba's son, however, had not at his lodging sufficient accommodations for entertainment. He therefore told his father of the difficulty in which Cogia Hussein's favors had placed him. And Ali Baba, with great willingness at once, offered to arrange matters. "My son," said he, "tomorrow, being a holiday, all shops will be closed. Then do you, after dinner, invite Cogia Hussein to walk with you, and as you return, bring him this way and beg him to come in. That will be better than a formal invitation, and Morgiana shall have a supper prepared for you." This proposal was exactly what Ali Baba's son could have wished, so on the morrow he brought Cogia Hussein to the door as if by accident, and stopping, invited him to enter. Cogia Hussein, who saw his object thus suddenly attained, began by showing pretended reluctance. But Ali Baba himself came to the door, pressed him in the most kindly manner to enter, and before long had conducted him to the table where food stood prepared. But there an unlooked-for difficulty arose. Wicked though he might be, the robber captain was not so impious as to eat salt of the man he intended to kill. He therefore began with many apologies to excuse himself, and when Ali Baba sought to know the reason, "Sir," said he, "I am sure that if you knew the cause of my resolution, you would approve of it. Suffice it to say that I have made it a rule to eat of no dish that has salt in it. How then can I sit down at your table if I must reject everything that is set before me?" "If that is your scruple," said Ali Baba, "it shall soon be satisfied." And he sent orders to the kitchen that no salt was to be put into any of the dishes presented to be served to the newly arrived guest. "Thus," said he to Cogia Hussein, "I shall still have the honor to which I have looked forward of returning to you under my own roof the hospitality you have shown to my son." Morgiana, who was just about to serve supper, received the order with some discontent. "Who," she said, "is this difficult person that refuses to eat salt? He must be a curiosity worth looking at." So, when the saltless courses were ready to be set upon the table, she herself helped to carry in the dishes. No sooner had she set eyes on Cogia Hussein than she recognized him in spite of his disguise, and observing his movements with great attention, she saw that he had a dagger concealed beneath his robe. "Ah," she said to herself, "here is reason enough, for who will eat salt with the man he means to murder? But he shall not murder my master if I can prevent it." Now Morgiana knew that the most favorable opportunity for the robber captain to carry out his design would be after the courses had been withdrawn and when Ali Baba and his son and guest were alone together over their wine, which indeed was the very project that Cogia Hussein had formed. Going forth, therefore, in haste, she dressed herself as a dancer, assuming the headdress and mask suitable for the character. Then she fastened a silver girdle about her waist and hung upon it a dagger of the same material. Thus equipped, she said to Abdallah the cook, "Take your tabor and let us go in and give an entertainment in honor of our master's guest." So Abdallah took his tabor and played Morgiana into the hall. As soon as she had entered, she made a low curtsy and stood awaiting orders. Then Ali Baba, seeing that she wished to perform in his guest's honor, said kindly, "Come in, Morgiana, and show Cogia Hussein what you can do." Immediately, Abdallah began to beat upon his tabor and sing an air for Morgiana to dance to, and she, advancing with much grace and propriety of deportment, began to move through several figures, performing them with ease and facility, which none but the most highly practiced can attain to. Then, for the last figure of all, she drew out the dagger, and holding it in her hand, danced a dance which excelled all that had preceded it, and in the surprise and change and quickness and dexterity of its movements. Now she presented the dagger at her own breast, now at one of the onlookers, but always in the act of striking, she drew back. At length, as though out of breath, she snatched his instrument from Abdallah with her left hand and, still holding the dagger in her right, advanced the hollow of the tabor toward her master, as is the custom of dancers when claiming their fee. Ali Baba threw in a piece of gold. His son did likewise. Then advancing it in the same manner towards Cogia Hussein, who was feeling for his purse, she struck under it and before he knew had plunged her dagger deep into his heart. Ali Baba and his son, seeing their guest fall dead, cried out in horror at the deed. "Wretch!" exclaimed Ali Baba, "what ruin and shame hast thou brought on us?" "Nay," answered Morgiana, "it is not your ruin, but your life that I have thus secured. Look and convince yourself what man was this which refused to eat salt with you." So saying, she tore off the dead robber's disguise, showing the dagger concealed beneath, and the face which her master now, for the first time, recognized. Ali Baba's gratitude to Morgiana for thus preserving his life a second time knew no bounds. He took her in his arms and embraced her as a daughter. "Now," said he, "the time is come when I must fulfill my debt, and how better can I do it than by marrying you to my son?" This proposition, far from proving unwelcome to the young man, did but confirm an inclination already formed. A few days later, the nuptials were celebrated with great joy and solemnity, and the union thus auspiciously commenced was productive of as much happiness as lies within the power of mortals to secure. As for the robber's cave, it remained the secret possession of Ali Baba and his posterity, and using their good fortune with equity and moderation, they rose to high office in the city and were held in great honor by all who knew them. And thus ends the story of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves from the Arabian Nights Tales. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Miss Kate. That was great. I just love that story so much. I hope you all enjoyed it too. And next up, we are going to continue with Jack London's White Fang, and Mr. Nathaniel will be reading it.
White Fang by Jack London. Chapter 2, The She-Wolf. Breakfast eaten and the slim camp outfit lashed to the sled, the men turned their backs on the cheery fire and launched out into the darkness. At once began to rise the cries that were fiercely sad, cries that called through the darkness and cold to one another and answered back. Conversation ceased. Daylight came at 9 o'clock. At midday, the sky to the south warmed to rose color, marked where the bulge of the earth intervened between the meridian sun and the northern world. But the rose color swiftly faded. The gray light of day that remained lasted until 3 o'clock, when it too faded, and the pall of the Arctic night descended upon the lone and silent land. As darkness came on, the hunting cries to right and left and rear drew closer, so close that more than once they sent surges of fear through the toiling dogs, throwing them into short-lived panics. At the conclusion of one such panic, when he and Henry had got the dogs back in the traces, Bill said, "I wish they'd strike game somewheres and go away and leave us alone." "They do get on the nerves horrible," Henry sympathized. They spoke no more until camp was made. Henry is bending over and adding ice to the babbling pot of beans when he was startled by the sound of a blow, an exclamation from Bill, and a sharp, snarling cry of pain from among the dogs. He straightened up in time to see a dim form disappearing across the snow into the shelter of the dark. Then he saw Bill, standing amid the dogs, half triumphant, half crestfallen. In one hand, a stout club, and the other, the tail and part of the body of a sun-cured salmon. "You got half of it," he announced, but I got a whack at it just the same. Did you hear it squeal?" "What did it look like?" Henry asked. "Couldn't see, but it had 4 legs and a mouth and hair, and it looked like a dog. Must be a tame wolf, I reckon. It's damn tame, whatever it is, coming in here at feeding time and getting its whack of fish." That night, when supper was finished and they sat on the oblong box and pulled at their pipes, the circle of gleaming eyes grew in even closer than before. "I wish they'd spring up a bunch of moose or something and go away and leave us alone," Bill said. Henry grunted with an intonation that was not all sympathy, and for a quarter of an hour they sat on in silence, Henry staring at the fire and Bill at the circle of eyes that burned in the darkness just beyond the firelight. "I wish we was pulling into McGurry right now," he began again. "Shut up your wishing and your croaking," Henry burst out angrily. "Your stomach's sour. That's what's ailing you. Swallow a spoonful of soddy and you'll sweeten up wonderful and be more pleasant company." In the morning, Henry was aroused by fervid blasphemy that proceeded from the mouth of Bill. Henry propped himself up on an elbow and looked to see his comrade standing among the dogs beside the replenished fire, his arms raised in objurgation, his face distorted with passion. "Hello," Henry called. "What's up now?" "Frog's gone," came the answer. "No." "I tell you yes." Henry leaped out of the blankets into the dogs. He counted them with care and then joined his partner in cursing the power of the wild that had robbed them of another dog. "Frog was the strongest dog of the bunch," Bill pronounced finally. "And he was no fool dog neither," Henry added. And so was recorded the second epitaph in 2 days. A gloomy breakfast was eaten, and the 4 remaining dogs were harnessed to the sled. The day was a repetition of the days that had gone before. The men toiled without speech across the face of the frozen world. The silence was unbroken save by the cries of their pursuers that, unseen, hung upon their rear. With the coming of night in the mid-afternoon, the cries sounded closer as the pursuers drew in according to their custom, and the dogs grew excited and frightened, and were guilty of panics that tangled the traces and further depressed the 2 men. "There, that'll fix you, fool critters," Bill said with satisfaction that night, standing erect at completion of his task. Henry left the cooking to come and see. Not only had his partner tied the dogs up, but he had tied them after the Indian fashion with sticks. About the neck of each dog, he had fastened a leather thong to this, and so close to the neck that the dogs could not get his teeth to it, he had tied a stout stick 4 or 5 feet in length. The other end of the stick, in turn, was made fast to the stake in the ground by means of a leather thong. The dog was unable to gnaw through the leather at his own end of the stick. The stick prevented him from getting at the leather that fastened the other end. Henry nodded his head approvingly. "It's the only contraption that'll ever hold one ear," he said. "He can gnaw through leather as clean as knife and just about half as quick." "They'll all be here in the morning, hunky-dory." "You just bet they will," Bill affirmed. If one of them turns up missing, I'll go without my coffee." "They just know we ain't loaded to kill," Henry remarked at bedtime, indicating the gleaming circle that hemmed them in. "If we could put a couple of shots into them, they'd be more respectful. They come closer every night. Get the firelight out of your eyes and look hard. There, you see that one?" For some time, the 2 men amused themselves with watching the movement of vague forms on the edge of the firelight. By looking closely and steadily at where a pair of eyes burned in the darkness, the form of the animal would slowly take shape. They could even see these forms move at times. A sound among the dogs attracted the men's attention. One ear was uttering quick, eager whines, lunging at the length of a stick towards the darkness and desisting now and again in order to make frantic attacks on the stick with his teeth. "Look at that, Bill," Henry whispered. Full into the firelight, with a stealthy sidelong movement, glided a dog-like animal. It moved with commingled mistrust and daring, cautiously observing the men, its attention fixed on the dogs. One Ear strained the full length of the stick toward the intruder and whined with eagerness. "That fool One Ear don't seem scared much," Bill said in a low tone. "It's a she-wolf," Henry whispered back. "And that accounts for Fatty and Frog. She's the decoy for the pack. She draws out the dog, and then all the rest pitches in and eats him up." The fire crackled. A log fell apart with a loud, spluttering noise. At the sound of it, the strange animal leaped back into the darkness. "Henry, I'm a-thinking," Bill announced. "Thinking what?" "I'm a-thinking that was the one I lambasted with the club." "Ain't the slightest doubt in the world," was Henry's response. "And right here, I want to remark," Bill went on, that animal's familiarity with campfires is suspicious and immoral." "It knows for certain more than a self-respecting wolf ought to know," Henry agreed. "A wolf that knows enough to come in with the dogs at a feeding time has had experiences. Old Villain had a dog once that run away with the wolves," Bill cogitates out loud. "I ought to know. I shot it out of the pack in a moose pasture over on Little Stick. And old Villain cried like a baby. Hadn't seen it for 3 years, he said. Been with the wolves all the time." "I reckon you called the term, Bill. That wolf's a dog, and it's eaten fish many's a time from the hand of man. And if I get a chance at it, that wolf that's a dog will just be meat," Bill declared. "We can't afford to lose no more animals." "But you've only got 3 cartridges," Henry objected. "I'll wait for a dead sure shot," was the reply. In the morning, Henry renewed the fire and cooked breakfast to the accompaniment of his partner's snoring. You was sleeping just too comfortable for anything," Henry told him as he routed him for breakfast. "I hadn't the heart to rouse you." Bill began to eat sleepily. He noticed that his cup was empty and started to reach for the pot, but the pot was beyond arm's length and beside Henry. "Say, Henry," he chided gently, "ain't you forgot something?" Henry looked about with great carefulness and shook his head. Bill held up the empty cup. "You don't get no coffee," Henry announced. "Ain't run out?" Bill asked anxiously. "Nope." "Ain't thinking it'll hurt my digestion?" "Nope." A flush of angry blood pervaded Bill's face. "It's just warm and anxious I am to be hearing you explain yourself," he said. "Spanker's gone," Henry answered. Without haste, the air of one resigned to misfortune, Bill turned his head and, from where he sat, counted the dogs. "How did it happen?" he asked apathetically. Henry shrugged his shoulders. "Don't know. Unless One Ear gnawed him loose, he couldn't have done it himself, that's sure." "That darn cuss," Bill spoke gravely and slowly, with no hint of anger that was raging within. "Just because he couldn't chew himself loose, he chews Spanker loose. Well, Spanker's troubles is over anyway. I guess he's digested by this time and convorting over the landscape in the bellies of 20 different wolves," was Henry's epitaph on this, the latest lost dog. "Have some coffee, Bill." But Bill shook his head. "Go on," Henry pleaded, elevating the pot. Bill shoved the cup aside. "I'll be a ding-dong damned if I do. I said I wouldn't if ary a dog turned up missing, and I won't." "It's darn good coffee," Henry said enticingly. But Bill was stubborn, and he ate a dry breakfast washed down with mumbled curses at One Ear for the trick he had played. "I'll tie him up out of reach of the other tonight," Bill said as they took the trail. They had traveled little more than 100 yards when Henry, who was in front, bent down and picked up something with which his snowshoe had collided. It was dark, but he could not see it, but he recognized it by touch. He flung it back so that it struck the sled and bounced along until it fetched up on Bill's snowshoes. "Maybe you'll need that in your business," Henry said. Bill uttered an exclamation. It was all that was left of Spanker, the stick with which he had been tied. "They ate him, hide and all," Bill announced. "The stick's as clean as a whistle. They've ate the leather off in both ends. They're damn hungry, Henry, and they'll have you and me guessing before the trip's over." Henry laughed defiantly. "I ain't been trailed this way by wolves before, but I've gone through a whole lot worse and kept my health. Takes more than a handful of them pesky critters to do yours truly, Bill, my son." I don't know, Bill muttered ominously. "Well, you'll know all right when we pull into McGurry." "I ain't feeling special enthusiastic," Bill persisted. "You're off color. That's what's the matter with you," Henry dogmatized. "What you need is quinine, and I'm going to dose you up stiff as soon as we make McGurry." Bill grunted his disagreement with the diagnosis and lapsed into silence. The day was like all the days. Light came at 9 o'clock. At 12 o'clock, the southern horizon was warmed by the unseen sun, and then began the cold gray of afternoon that would merge 3 hours later into night. It was just after the sun's futile effort to appear that Bill slipped the rifle from under the sled lashings and said, "You keep right on, Henry. I'm going to see what I can see." "You better stick to the sled," his partner protested. "You've only got 3 cartridges, and there's no telling what might happen." "What's croaking now?" Bill demanded triumphantly. Henry made no reply and plodded on alone, though often he cast anxious glances back into the gray solitude where his partner had disappeared. An hour later, taking advantage of the cutoffs around which the sled had gone to, Bill arrived. "They're scatting ranging along wide," he said, "keeping up with us and looking for game at the same time. You see, they're sure of us, only they know they got to wait to get us. In the meantime, they're willing to pick up anything eatable that comes handy." "You mean they think they're sure of us?" Henry objected pointedly. But Bill ignored him. "I've seen some of them. They're pretty thin. They ain't had a bite in weeks, I reckon, outside of Fatty and Frog and Spanker. And there's so many of them that they didn't go far. They're remarkable thin. Their ribs is like washboards, and their stomachs is right up against their backbones. They're pretty desperate, I can tell you. They'll be going mad yet, and then watch out." A few minutes later, Henry, who was now traveling behind the sled, emitted a low warning whistle. Bill turned and looked, then quietly stopped the dogs. To the rear, from around the last bend and plainly into view on the very last trail they had just covered, trotted a furry, slinking form. Its nose was to the trail, and it trotted with a peculiar, sliding, effortless gait. When they halted, it halted, throwing up its head and regarding them steadily with nostrils that twitched as it caught and studied the scent of them. "It's the she-wolf," Bill answered. The dogs had laid down in the snow, and he walked past them to join his partner in the sled. Together they watched the strange animal that had pursued them for days, and that had already accomplished the destruction of half their dog team. After a searching scrutiny, the animal trotted forward a few steps. Then it repeated several times till it was short 100 yards away. It paused, head up, close by a clump of spruce trees, and with a slight and sense studied the outfit of the watching men. It looked at them in a strangely wistful way, after the manner of a dog, but in its wistfulness there was none of the dog affection. It was a wistfulness bred of hunger, as cruel as its own fangs, as merciless as the frost itself. It was large for a wolf, its gaunt frame advertising the lines of an animal that was among the largest of its kind. Stands pretty close to 2.5 feet at the shoulders, Henry commented. And I'll bet it ain't far from 5 feet long. Kind of a strange color for a wolf, was Bill's criticism. I never seen a red wolf before. Looks almost cinnamon to me. The animal was certainly not cinnamon colored. Its coat was the true wolf coat. The dominant color was gray, and yet there was to it a faint reddish hue. A hue that was baffling, that appeared and disappeared, that was more like an illusion, the vision. Now gray, distinctly gray, and again giving hints and glints of a vague redness of color, not classifiable in terms of ordinary experience. Looks for all the world like a big husky sled dog, Bill said. I wouldn't be surprised to see it wag its tail. Hello, you husky, he called. Come here, you whatever your name is. Ain't a bit scared of you, Henry laughed. Bill waved his head at it threateningly and shouted loudly, but the animal betrayed no fear. The only change in it that they could notice was an accession of alertness. It still regarded them with the merciless wistfulness of hunger. They were meat, and it was hungry, and it would like to go in and eat them if it dared. Look here, Henry, Bill said, unconsciously lowering his voice to a whisper because of what he imitated. We've got 3 cartridges, but it's a dead shot. Couldn't miss it. It's got away with 3 of our dogs, and we ought to put a stop to it. What do you say? Henry nodded his consent. Bill cautiously slipped the gun from under the sled lashing. The gun was on the way to his shoulder, but it never got there, for in that instant, the she-wolf leaped sideways from the trail into the clump of spruce trees and disappeared. The 2 men looked at each other. Henry whistled long and comprehendingly. I might have knowed it, Henry chided himself aloud as he replaced the gun. Of course a wolf that knows enough to come in when the dogs is at feeding time knows about shooting irons. I tell you right now, Henry, that critter's the cause of all of our trouble. We've had 6 dogs at the present time instead of 3 if it wasn't for her. And I tell you right now, Henry, I'm going to get her. She's too smart to be shot in the open, but I'm going to lay for her. I'll bushwhack her as sure as my name is Bill. You needn't stray off too far in doing it, his partner admonished. If that pack ever starts to jump you, them 3 cartridges will be worth nothing than 3 whoops in hell. Them animals is damn hungry, and once they start in, they'll sure get you, Bill. They camped early that night. 3 dogs could not drag the sled so fast nor for so long hours as could 6, but they were showing unmistakable signs of playing out. And the men went early to bed, Bill first seeing to it the dogs were tied out of gnawing reach of one another. But the wolves were growing bolder, and the men were aroused more than once from their sleep. So near did the wolves approach that the dogs became frantic with terror, and it was necessary to replenish the fire from time to time in order to keep the adventurous marauders at safer distance. I've heard sailors talk of sharks following a ship, Bill remarked as he crawled back into the blankets after one such replenishing of the fire. Well, them wolves is land sharks. They know their business better than we do, and they ain't a-holding our trail this way for their health. They're going to get us. They're sure going to get us, Henry. They've half got you already a-talking like that, Henry retorted sharply. A man's half licked when he says he is, and you're half eaten from the way you're going on about it. They've got away with better men than you and me, Bill answered. Ah, shut up, you're croaking. You make me all fire tired. Henry rolled over angrily on his side. He was surprised that Bill made no similar display of temper. This was not Bill's way, for he was easily angered by sharp words. Henry thought long over before he went to sleep, and as his eyelids fluttered down and he dozed off, the thought in his mind was, there's no mistaking it. Bill's almighty blue. I'll have to cheer him up tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Nathaniel. That was great. I can't wait till next week to hear more of White Fang. And thank you to everybody for joining us today. If you like what you see, please share our video. And also, you may like us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Again, thank you for allowing us to give back and share these wonderful stories. Remember, they're all in public domain, and you can find copies online if you would like to read more. Well, that's all for this week. We'll hope to see you soon. Keep reading.